Good morning, students. Today we talk about the Italian unification, but just to sum it up, in our previous video, we had seen the enormous amount of contribution that was made by um, Bismarck, one of the most famous Germans to have ever lived, along with, of course, Mr. Rudolf Hitler, whereby Bismarck had defeated militarily because he always thought that conversation and talking and negotiation would never work. He always believed in brute military force. He could see that, yes, we could keep talking for generations and centuries, but nothing would ever come out of it. And he had learned that lesson in 1830 when revolution had happened in different parts of Europe, and some people had tried to bring it on in Germany, but it did not work. Then again in 1848 it did not work, and Bismarck had learned the lesson that talking and negotiations would not take them far enough, and the unification would always remain a dream. So he understood that yes, it is only through the military force, it would be only through the armies, through brute force, that German unification would happen, and he used his army to and under him, in fact, Prussian army that is was the most effective and the most disciplined and the most dangerous army in Europe under his leadership. And he did a great job in defeating the other European imperial powers who were a hindrance to German unification, the armies of France and the armies of Austria, and also the Russians. So uh, he ensured the German unification in the year 1871. Now, there was another very important geography which had not been united, and that was Italy. Now, Italy was never a united kind of Italy, and as you would see right here. But before you go into this, remember this map, which is this map I'm talking about, which is about the geography of Germany when the unification had happened in 1871. Remember this year, students, it's very important. Now we come to Italy united, whereby like Germany, if you go through the first sentence, like Germany, Italy too had a long history of political fragmentation. Italians were scattered over several dynastic states as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. During the middle of the 19th century, Italy was divided into seven states, of which only one, Sardinia Piedmont, was ruled by an Italian princely house. The north was under Austrian Habsburg, the center was ruled by the Pope, and the southern regions were under the domination of the Bourbon kings of Spain. Students, you don't have a choice but to remember these ruling dynasties. Otherwise, you would never be able to write your answers properly. Habsburg, who were Habsburg, then the Austrians, the French. You will have to understand that yes, there was a ruling family that was known as Bourbon. So you'll have to remember all of this. So when we are talking right now about Italy, then these were the most prominent imperial powers that would never allow the unification of Italy to happen. And uh, and of course, you know who the Pope is. Pope always happens to be the head of the Catholic Church. That is, all the Catholic Christians come under his leadership. So during 1830s, I'm sorry, during 1830s, Giuseppe Mazzini had sought to put together a coherent program for a unitary Italian republic. He had also formed a secret society called Young Italy for the dissemination of his goals. The failure of the revolutionary uprising both in 1831 and 1848 meant that the mantle now felt on Sardinia Piedmont under its ruler King Victor Emmanuel II to unify the Italian states through war. In the eyes of the ruling elite of this region, a unified Italy offered them the possibility of economic development and political dominance. Students, I wish they had elaborated a bit on the greatest revolutionary who ensured the unification of Italy, and his name was Garibaldi. Now, Garibaldi was was born in around I think 1806 or 1807, when the Holy Roman Empire had been destroyed by Napoleon. Okay. Yes, and interestingly, Garibaldi came from a fisherman's family. You know, his family was into trading of fish. His father was a fisherman, and so it was not expected of him to become one of the greatest generals of all time. Not just Italian general students, but one of the greatest generals of all time. Okay, and he was considered to be an expert with sword. Okay, imagine a fisherman being expert with sword. And once when asked about it, about his expertise with sword, and he had very famously remarked, if I can quote him correctly, that the use of sword I learned was by defending my own, right? So it was while just trying to save my own neck, I became an expert in butchering the neck of others. Okay, so that's how it was. And he became, he essentially, but he had that also a fisherman's spirit, whereby he liked the waters, and he always kind of was into keen about looking at different places, traveling, visiting places. And for the first time, he had heard about, and he thought about this political aspiration of his, and the military aspiration about the unification of Italy, when he was actually traveling to Russia. He just wanted to see Russia, and that's how it was. And in this chapter, when you would read about Mazzini, Mazzini was not a military man. He was essentially an intellectual guy who had this dream of unification of Italy, because he was the one who had formed Young Italy in Marseille in 1831. Marseille happens to be today France. Okay, now but Garibaldi got this inspiration of yes, that Italy needs unification, but that's how it was. Garibaldi, because he was very much a free-spirited guy, and you'd be surprised to know that he returned from Russia, and then where does he go next? He goes to Brazil. He doesn't stop in Europe to fight battles. He goes to Brazil, and why? Because there was another revolution going on in Brazil. In that is, you have to understand, Brazil is in South America, right? So he went to South America. Just he wanted to see the place, and he fought in Brazil, and then he also fought against the Argentinians in support of the Uruguayans. But it might appear to be a very scattered kind of an adventure. But then all this experience, because he learned a great amount of great deal of military strategies, great deal of strategies and techniques of guerrilla warfare. And when he came back to Europe, because and in fact, students always remember one thing: Garibaldi is always associated with red shirts, and red shirts, you would, whenever you would study in whatever level you would study about Italian unification and Garibaldi, you would always study about red shirts. But then Garibaldi did not form red shirts in Europe, though he was the one and the literally considered to be the main guy, for at least the military guy, for the Italian unification. But the red shirts were formed by Garibaldi when he was in South America fighting guerrilla warfare. Okay, so he carried all that great amount of military expertise and experience, and how to make the optimum use of the limited resources, limited men, when he came to Europe. Now when he came to Europe with the Europeans and the with the Italians, he had this great amount of military genius that he had gathered in South America, and of course, a great art of sword fight. And to cut it short, he was extremely instrumental in the unification of Italy, whereby, in spite of all the setbacks, setbacks, he persevered and persevered. And in this chapter, in rather, I think in the in the coming paragraphs, you would also read about the chief minister. Yes, right here. Chief Minister Count Cavour, who led the movement to unify the regions of Italy, was neither a revolutionary nor a democrat. Like any other wealthy and educated member of the Italian elite, he spoke French much better than he did Italian. Through a tactful diplomatic alliance with the France engineered by Cavour, Sardinia Piedmont succeeded in defeating the Austrian forces in 1859. Now, students, Count Cavour, who was the chief minister of Sardinia Piedmont, as we had seen in the beginning, that is today. Sardinia Piedmont was the only province which was completely under Italian occupation, and in fact, the king was only the king in reality of Sardinia Piedmont. Okay, because the rest of the area of Italy was definitely not under his influence. It had been divided among the Pope, the Austrian, the Spanish. So he was only the head of Sardinia Piedmont, but it was because of it that, but and Count Cavour was the head of was the chief minister of Sardinia Piedmont. Now Count Cavour, though very interestingly, Count Cavour and Garibaldi, they were not great friends or great admirers of each other, but they helped each other because the cause was they had united behind the cause. That Count Cavour understood that Italian unification had to be done, and the foreigners had to be kicked out of the lands of Italy, and so was Garibaldi. He was also adamant that yes, the foreigners had to be kicked out of Italy. And that is how it had happened. Now, if you look at the Sardinia Piedmont, the diagram of Sardinia Piedmont in the Italian states, then you would see that it happens to be in the north. Now, Garibaldi, when he started the fight for the Italian unification, and students, it is not like, please do not think that it is like some kind of battle of Panipat, whereby the fight happens in 1526, and then in a day or two, Babur becomes the ruler of India, and Ibrahim Lodi is gone, and he establishes the Mughal Empire. No, it was not like that. The Italian unification took years and years after great many deals of setbacks. Okay, so it was always one step forward, then two step backwards, and then again mustering all that courage and resources, and then again one step forward, and then again two step backwards. Yes, but they persisted and persisted, and how it worked was, if you look at the map, then Sardinia Piedmont happens to be in the northern areas, and Garibaldi and his men of red shirts, they approached from south. Okay, now the idea was to eliminate the enemies from south, as Garibaldi moved with his military force from the south, and that's what he did. He kept moving from the south. Okay, if you look at if you look at the map, then this is what it is, and he started moving from the areas around uh, uh, Sicily and these places, and that's how, through boats and everything, he through waterways, he started moving north. Okay, and Count Cavour was a great strategist. Now he did not want the other European powers, who were much more powerful than Sardinia Piedmont, that is the Austrians and the Spanish, to to know that Sardinia Piedmont was officially supporting Garibaldi. Okay, so Count Cavour could could never afford to be seen in the limelight. So what he did was, through his back channels, he kept supporting Garibaldi with men and money and resources and diplomatic support whenever that was needed. And that is what happened, that Garibaldi moved from south, and Sardinia Piedmont, because it's in the north, so the ruler Victor Emmanuel, he moved from north. They they took over the enterprise and the adventure in the north, and while Garibaldi was moving towards north from south. Okay, now they were instrumental in unifying and defeating most of the armies which were there in these lands, and by 1861, almost a whole of Italy was united, except except Rome itself. Today, Rome happens to be the capital of Italy. But imagine a situation where, okay,